So today we are going to talk about CircleCI and Firebase hosting. How many of you know Firebase? Right? So Firebase is an ecosystem of services, right? It initially was conceived by Google as a real-time database, and then Google went on building a lot of services around Firebase, and mostly for building better apps and for analytics as well as marketing. A lot of you can conduct a lot of experiments using Firebase, A/B testing, and all that stuff, right? So we are not here to talk about all of that. So I know a lot of people might not even be very comfortable with web technologies. So I'm not going to throw a lot of jargons at you and make you clueless. Rather, the idea of today's talk is that when you go out of the room, you know how to host a site and probably how to host it in a CI/CD environment, right? So anyone who has published a website before? Good. So this is how publishing a website feels like, right? A lot of tasks, so hard, all these jargons, HTTP. Okay, why do you even care, right? It's just about taking a bunch of files and making it available on internet, right? That's the minimum requirement you have, right? And Firebase hosting is really good at hosting your websites. And to be really honest, it's just like 3 commands, and then you host the site. But that's not just the case, right? I'll give you a very good example. Today, it happened. So there were some issues, right? And then the schedule changed, right? Today, how many of you checked the Firebase, the GDG Bangalore site, right? So you must have noticed, right? Some of the people were carrying the older version of the timetable, right? The schedule you had. And then somebody came on the stage and said, hey, can you go and check the site again for the new updated schedule, right? And you went on and checked it. So I am actually maintaining that site. I was sitting there, and the information came, just update the link, right? Imagine the kind of pressure you have, right? You need to make sure that it publishes well, it's up and live. You need to run your test cases. You need to make sure nothing breaks, right? And if you do it in a manual fashion, then you cannot guarantee that it was a right release, right? So that is where CI/CD comes into place. In a nutshell, CircleCI is again a service wherein you define what is your build process looks like, what are the commands you want to run on the server, and then how do you host it, right? So it's like a general pipeline, and whenever you create, whenever you commit on your repo, how many of you are comfortable with Git? Okay, great. So I don't need to explain Git. So whenever you commit, what happens? The code gets saved, right? That's what you do. When you commit and you push it, it gets saved in your remote place, right? But that does not publish as a site or is entitled to be a deployment, right? Deployment is something else. You can't just push code into the internet and expect it to work. You need to build that piece of code, ship it into some sort of a package, or you can say a minified version of a website. So it totally depends upon your case. So in a website, you just want to just compile it and then take that build package and then put it on the server, right? That's what you want to do. So there are 2 parts. One is CircleCI and one is Firebase hosting. So Firebase hosting is just for deploying the site, and CircleCI is basically your whole CI flow, right? So if you go to, how many of you are working here? Anyone? Okay, a lot of people, actually. Great. So a big disclaimer. This is a very oversimplified development lifecycle. I'm pretty sure it's much way sophisticated than what it looks like in the slides right now. So the disclaimer is that I'm going to just simplify the whole workflow, and I'll show you how Firebase hosting and CircleCI fit into this place, right? So usually you have a product owners, right? Anyone product owner in this house? No? Okay. So usually these are the guys, point of contact for all these new features, right? Let's say here in my case, the product owner can be the organizing team. The organizing team makes those demands, makes those requests. They are the point of contact for the customers or clients or users. They decide, what is the new feature, new update, any content update, or any small changes. The product owner is actually constantly making those requests, right? Probably it ends up in your Trello board, maybe on whatever tool you're using to manage your work, or maybe Jira. So you get these requests, right, feature requests, and they're very straightforward. It just ends up in your bucket. And then, there's a lot of prioritization and stuff, regular stuff, which happens. How easy, it would be nice, right, when you just ship this feature back to the application, right? There is a reason why, it's marked red. It never happens like that. There's a lot of intermediate steps in between. So you have some development, that is the work you need to put in, and then there is a build workflow, and then there's actually a deployment. So build workflow is again a very convoluted area, so that differs from case to case. For a simple website, it might just be running a build command. So again, a build workflow can be very complex as well. It might have integration test cases, it can be your unit test cases, regression suite, and all that stuff. A lot of sophisticated, but we're not going to go there. We're going to just keep it very simple. We have a site, we need to build it, we need to deploy it, right? And the deployment is actual transfer, wherein you take this package and put it on your actual deployment server, right? And then once it's up, the feature is on the application, right? And then there's a QA. How many of you are QA developers or QA guys? No? Okay, there's one, right? All right. Then I have to moderate my talk. So there's always a tussle, right? There is always test cases while you are deploying in a staging environment or in a beta environment. There's probably it's never going to make it, and most of the times it's just that something went wrong in the build server, right? How many of you have faced that? Nobody? Okay, so next time when your QA complains, there was some issue in the deployment or something, just check out, is it an issue with your deployment, your code, or is just that, something went wrong in the build process, right? So if you're not setting up your build processes right, your deployment is prone to be a failure, right? And there's always this constant QA tussle. They might just come back and say, hey, can you change this? Can you update this? They start behaving like product owners, and it becomes a problem, right? Your deployment does not go in, right? And that's where CIs come in place. They make all these steps execute in a faster fashion. So when I say faster, basically you have some sort of a very high-end environment wherein you can do all these build processes and get your deployment out. So it's quite expensive, right? Just to have, for building your project, why do you need even those high-end servers, right? You can do it on a local machine, right? People do that. You do an npm run build, you get it out, right? So there are different use cases. You might want to have a high-end machine just to build all these things, or you can even have a very low-end machine to handle that. So Circle CI comes into this picture, wherein they say, hey, whenever whenever you trigger event, like say commit and push, Circle CI spawns off environment, and then it checks out the code, runs all these commands which you mentioned, and then it's going to do the deployment, right? That's the contract which you have with Circle CI. By the way, Circle CI, again, sorry I didn't mention it before, it's a service. So it's not like something you need to learn, or it's not any framework or language. It's just a service. And they have a decent free tier, so you can use it for your side projects. And if you have like something in production, you can always go for the paid plans. So why Circle CI? How many of you know that GitHub had got actions recently? Nice, right? So Circle CI is something like actions. Basically, it's much mature, and I would say it's been in the industry for a while now, right? So Circle CI workflow is something which bridges this gap between your deployment and development. That lets you to focus more on development rather than deployment. In big companies, it's always a problem. You must have heard Jenkins. How many of you have heard Jenkins? Right? That's like, I have used Jenkins in a previous company, and it's a horrible experience, right? You need to go and deploy this infrastructure at a local place. CircleCI is really smooth. Since it's a hosted service, everything is already up there. All you need to do is describe a Docker image, and then it pulls it. It runs the commands and stuff, right? So where does Firebase hosting come? So Firebase hosting is just a deployment infrastructure available. So you can just go and deploy sites. That's all it gives you. The benefit of using Firebase hosting is that it gives you HTTPS, so you don't need to deal the certificates and stuff. So it's always safe to use Firebase hosting, and it's quite reliable actually. They have a very decent SLA, and their free tier has like around 10 GB, and I really don't think so any website would be having resources more than 10 GB unless you have a lot of images, right? So the added benefit is that you have testing in between, only if you have written test cases, which might not be the case always, right? So again, but then that's an added benefit. You can always have your test case suite set up, and it's always triggered whenever the deployment is made, right? And that allows you to ship flawlessly, and also it does all of reporting. So let's say, there's some bad code in your commit, and let's say even when I was updating the site, let's say I had some small syntax error or something, and I didn't notice it, I just committed and pushed it, CircleCI is gonna block that build. That does not happen when you do it manually. So it's gonna make sure that the build, whatever goes, it makes sure that nothing goes wrong, right? And then your product owner, right, he's happy, right? When you are deploying at a better pace, I think that's what makes your end users happy. They get the new things quickly, right? Okay, so the demo. This is the part which is always difficult for everyone. If this thing goes wrong, please bear with me. So what I usually do is I show the whole end-to-end workflow. Here the internet connection is a bit poor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can host a site on Firebase hosting directly, so that at least what you learn is that, hey, this is a way to just host a site, and that's one thing. And then I'll show you a CircleCI workflow, which I've already set up, so that you get a rough idea how you can actually set up the workflow, right? So okay, I think, can we have this lights off so that it's visible? Quite the opposite. Okay, nice. I'm actually a big fan of dark themes, so I'm sorry. I forgot that it's a dark theme over there. I was careful with the slides. All right, so there's something called, if you just go and install Firebase, you just need to have that, and all you need to do is just hit Firebase deploy. So yeah, I'll actually show you this the structure here a bit. So I'm using a CRA, that's Create React App. Some of you might know it. So it just creates a boilerplate code, and it has some basic site in it. So let's just see if this thing works. Cool. So this is the, the least good-looking site. So what we'll try to do is we'll just try to host this. So first I'm going to do a build. So right, let me just run the build. So all it just does is it just needs to compile JSX back into normal JavaScript, does some minification and all that. So you don't really need to know what it is under. It just create React app gives you that out of box. So you just need to run the build command. So yeah, so when you run build, I think it's gonna put it in a folder called build, right? You can see this area, right? So everything which I need to deploy is under build. And if I go and click on hit Firebase deploy, okay. Okay, something is wrong. Okay, sorry. Actually, it's my mistake. So I didn't do a Firebase init. So before you do a Firebase deploy, you need to do a Firebase init. What it basically does is that it will add a couple of files which will map back to a Firebase project. And if you select over here hosting, it asks for whether you want to connect it to an existing project or create a new project. So what you can do is go and click on select create a new project. Okay, and let's name it as DevFest demo. What would you like to call? Okay, fine. Okay, some more issues. The demo always kills it. Okay, let's do one thing. I have a backup. So let's do one thing. We'll try to use the DevFest Bangalore site itself. I hope it does not pull down the site. So let's do one thing. I'll make a small change on the site. Let's just add an emoji, probably where in the para maybe, so that it's not highly noticeable. So what I'll do is I'll just go to the site. Okay. Let's go into the index. Fine. Just ignore all the code. Fine. So let me just update the text and do a very minimal change. So I'm going to just add an emoji probably, a star maybe. Fine. Okay, so I take the responsibility for this. Okay, so it's a small change. All I do is git add, and then I just commit it. Fine. Fine. So all I did is that I made this commit and pushed it, right? What would ideally happen? Actually, we can have the lights back. What would ideally happen? It would save these changes to your repo, right? But I have configured the Circle CI workflow for this, so I expect that it would create a job for this. Right. So this is my Circle CI dashboard. If you see, there are a lot of jobs running. You can see the second job over here is like 2 hours ago. So I have been constantly pushing changes, and I don't really go and do all these build processes, run those test cases, and do a Firebase deploy and all. So that's never the case. I just commit and push it, and Circle CI detects all these changes in your GitHub repo. So you sync your GitHub repo with Circle CI, and then it runs all these commands and stuff. So you see it's now green, right, 49 seconds ago. So if you open it, it's going to show all these steps inside it, and it will show what all went wrong. Right? So if it's all green, probably everything went well. And let's go and do a refresh. Okay, is it there? Yes, nice. So Usually, live demos never go well for me, but I thought let's take the risk. Fine. So I take the full responsibility of updating the text. I'm definitely, after the talk, going to remove that emoji. Doesn't look really good there. But you see, the ease of deploying, right? All you just need to go is change the code and just commit, and you just go and push, right? And how is it even possible? So we just saw the magic. I think what we want to see is that how you do it, right? That's the question. So whenever you create a Circle CI project, you go to their dashboard, you say, hey, I want to create a project. It's going to ask which repo. So it syncs with your GitHub repo. So you choose your repo. And then it says, hey, go and create a directory called .circleci. And under that, you should add a config YML. So everything is over here. OK, again, I think it's not visible. Yeah, lights off. Great. Audience knows it, right? Or if I remove the extension, okay. Fine. I think to an extent it's visible, right? Okay. So first you tell Circle CI, this is a YAML file, so it's like JSON. It's just that you don't have curly braces and stuff, and it's just an indented file. There you mention what is the Docker image you want to pull in. So here I probably want Node, so I'm just going to mention. So again, you don't really need to type all this thing. They give a very basic boilerplate code, and that's good enough to just deploy a basic site. So here you mention which branch, or sometimes you just want the deployment to happen over the master branch probably, or release branch. Let's say you set up a workflow and somebody creates a new branch and they commit the changes. You don't want that build to go, right? So you make that cherry picking decision that, hey, these are the set of branches I want to use. And then basic stuff, you have these run commands. I don't know how far you can see it. So if you see, there is a yarn build. That's the basic amount, basic command which I need to run. And then I give the deployment command. This is the exact deployment command. So this is like deploy, token, and only hosting. So this is like that command which I tried to run locally, which did not happen. See, that actually proves my demo. If I had to do a Firebase deploy myself on my local machine, I should have had dependencies like Firebase, right? Probably I didn't have that dependency locally installed, right? So all these kind of mistakes which can happen in your local machine, those are all avoided in a Circle CI job. So you make sure that this YAML defines your environment completely, so there is no scope of mistakes. Like, let's say if you have Jenkins, there's a probably there might be chances where dependencies are not there in the environment. Let's say you're using a very new package and your company has not added that dependency in the environment, so maybe it fails. That case is not gonna ever happen, because here you're explicitly mentioning it's almost like a image of that container. Actually, it is. So there is no scope of mistake over there, right? And Firebase hosting, again, it's a very simple thing. All you need to do is Firebase only hosting, and that will actually push your code to the site. And so this is Firebase console. So when you log into Firebase, you will probably end up on a page like this where you select your projects and stuff. So here, DevFest 19, right? We have this particular project. Let's open it. Cool. So there are a couple of things which we are using here. So let's say Firebase hosting, right? So even Firebase hosting has this history wherein you can see when the deployments have happened. So you always know that who is deploying and who has made the last change and everything. You can always track that. And if you have noticed, even though I did not deploy from my local, it still shows that I have made those changes. Any guesses how did the system actually they know? Token, who's that guy? Anyone? Oh, nice. You can get a sticker from me later. So yeah, whenever you want to trigger Firebase deploy, you need to be authenticated, right? How do you do it on an external machine, right? When you run Circle CI, when the Circle CI runs a job, that's an external environment. You cannot just simply add your credentials over there. So there, all you need to do is you need to have a Firebase CI token. So you can just generate it in local, you get a one-time use token, and you just put that into your Circle CI environment. Once it's there, so every time there's a deployment, it treats as if you are deploying it, since you generate the token. So that's how, there's a minimum basic setup required to do all that. So you can always check it out on Google, how to deploy on Firebase hosting with Circle CI. Apparently today I noticed that I have an article on Codeburst that comes on top always. So you can check the whole workflow, how you can do the whole CI/CD with Firebase hosting. So there, I mean, the point of this whole talk was not to go line by line and tell you that how to do it. There are always 101 articles everywhere around. But the idea is, why is it even that important? So it's a perfect example is our own site. We have to make those changes quickly. So we always opted to use Firebase. And not over. How many of you had rice in the lunch? Yeah, you are all sleepy, I know that. All right. So, a bonus part for this talk is that I wanted to share. I did the same in the last talk yesterday itself. How many of you there in that talk? Oh, quite a lot. So this is a repetition for you. You can ignore. So you can write CRUD APIs. Again, this is out of context for this talk, but then I'm still sharing it since a lot of Firebases are there here. So it's very frequent that you need to write CRUD APIs. Basically, create something, update something, delete something, retrieve all that stuff, right? Basic stuff around data. So using Cloud Functions, you can write those things very easily and just quickly deploy them. You can use it for your side projects. You can even use for production. So I noticed that it's always an overhead to write in JavaScript. Everyone is not really comfortable with it, and there's a lot of boilerplate code. So I thought, why not just have like a simple library wherein you just tell, these are my data items. Let's say, if you're creating an account, basically an account ID, name, balance, all that stuff, right? Basic stuff. So you just tell that, and it will actually create an API for it. So I just created this package called Firebase Wiz very recently. It's a pre-release. You can always go and test it out. And this is how the code looks like. Again, sorry for the dark theme. So it's like, you just tell, the basic stuff, what is that object is all around. Let's say, name, age, role, transcript, if you're modeling a person or maybe an employee or something, you can always model that data. So all you do is, set this data, and you get, all those APIs CRUD. So you can create, update, and delete. So you don't really need to write code and this like minified version around it. Okay. Who doesn't love stickers? So I actually went on and printed a bunch of stickers. Yesterday I gave it a lot of people. I have very few right now. So anyone who wants to, just get a sticker. Okay, people are raising hands. Okay, so just meet me outside. I'll be around somewhere here, and so you can just come and connect. We'll have a word. What is Firebase Wiz and all that, right? Any questions?